Okay, stop. Just stop whatever
Okay.
you're doing right now. Because I need you to think about that final duel in Dune Part 2. The arena, the sand, Austin Butler doing whatever that thing is he does with his face where he looks like a Renaissance painting that wants to end you. It's perfect cinema. Denis Villeneuve is operating on a level that should be illegal. Paul and Feyd-Rautha clash, blade against blade, in a fight that feels less like a battle and more like two sides of the same broken mirror finally shattering against each other. And Paul wins. The Emperor surrenders. The Fremen roar. The jihad begins. Roll credits. Masterpiece. We go home. But here's what's been eating at me for months. What if Feyd-Rautha never showed up on that battlefield as Paul's enemy? What if, instead, and stay with me here, what if Feyd-Rautha Harkonnen, the most dangerous man in the known universe, the Baron's prized weapon, the Viper in Silk, defected? What if he walked away from House Harkonnen, crossed enemy lines, and offered Paul Atreides the one thing no army, no sandworm, no voice could ever give him? The keys to destroying the Empire from the inside. I know, your brain just short-circuited a little. That's okay, that's what we're here for. Welcome back to MiniFlicks, where we don't just watch movies, we dissect alternate universes until they beg for mercy. I'm your host, and today we are running a full surgical procedure on Dune Part 1 and Part 2, cracking open the timeline at one precise, terrifyingly plausible moment and asking, what happens to Arrakis, to the Atreides, and to the fate of 1 trillion human souls if Feyd-Rautha makes one different choice? Our point of divergence? It's late in Dune Part 2. Feyd has just obliterated 3 gladiators in a birthday massacre that doubles as a love letter to chaos. The Baron is watching, pleased. The Emperor is circling. And Feyd, in the original timeline, simply waits. He is the weapon. He does what weapons do. He waits to be aimed. But what if, in that private moment after the arena, Feyd-Rautha Harkonnen stopped waiting? What if he started thinking? One choice, one moment. The entire universe fractures. Let's go. All right, before anyone comes at me in the comments saying, that makes no sense, Feyd would never, let me shut that down right now with cold, hard, canonical evidence. Because the whole point of a good theory isn't wild speculation. It's finding the crack that's already in the wall. And the crack in Feyd-Rautha's wall, it's been there the whole time. Look at what we actually know about Feyd from the films and Frank Herbert's novel. He is not a true believer. He is not ideologically committed to House Harkonnen's vision of galactic domination. He doesn't worship the Baron's cruelty. He performs it, because performance is the only language the Baron respects. Every sadistic act Feyd commits is, at some level, a transaction. I do this, you acknowledge my power. I survive another day. Feyd-Rautha is not a monster. He is a supremely intelligent man who was raised inside a machine of monsters and learned to dress like one. Here is the line from Herbert's novel that I keep coming back to. Feyd recognizes Paul as something genuinely new. In the book, their final confrontation crackles not just with violence, but with mutual recognition. 2 products of extraordinary breeding, staring at each other across a knife's edge, each one thinking, you are the only person in this universe who might actually understand what I am. That's not nothing. That is a fissure. Now, back to our point of divergence. It's after the Birthday Arena massacre. Feyd is alone, or as alone as a Harkonnen heir ever gets. He's just been told, in not so many words, that the Emperor himself is coming to Arrakis, that the Sardaukar will deploy, that the entire Imperial machine is mobilizing to crush one desert uprising. And Feyd is smart enough to do the maths. The Baron is using the Emperor as a shield. The Emperor is using the Harkonnens as a blade. And Feyd? Feyd is the blade's edge, the part that does all the cutting and gets discarded the moment it dulls. Now here's the domino. In the original timeline, Feyd accepts this. He is a weapon, and weapons don't negotiate their own deployment. But in our timeline, in the MiniFlicks alternate universe, Feyd does something the Baron never programmed him to do. He sends a message to Stilgar. Not to Paul directly. That would be traceable, naive. Feyd is neither. He routes it through a smuggler contact. And yes, the Harkonnen intelligence network absolutely has smuggler contacts on Arrakis. That is completely canonical. And the message contains 3 things. A proposed meeting location, a proof of good faith in the form of the full Sardaukar deployment schedule, and one line that cuts straight to the point. I am not my uncle. Tell the Lisan al-Gaib I am interested in a conversation about who actually rules the known universe after the dust settles. Now, Paul receives this message, and this is where it gets interesting, because Paul, by this point in Part 2, is already drowning in prescience. He can see the jihad. He can see the rivers of blood that flow from his own victory. He has watched 1 trillion futures, and in almost every single one, he wins, and the universe burns anyway. The message from Feyd is a variable he has never seen before. Think about that. Paul Atreides, the man who can see through time like it's a glass floor, receives a signal from a direction the visions never showed him. And instead of the future snapping into focus, it goes blurry. In Herbert's novel, Paul understands that true prescience is actually a prison. The more clearly you see the path, the more inevitable it becomes. The one thing that can break a prescience stranglehold on fate is genuine, unscripted human chaos. Feyd-Rautha defecting is, cosmically speaking, the most chaotic event possible. Paul calls a secret council. Chani is furious, obviously, because Chani is the only person in this entire saga who is running on pure rational intelligence and zero messianic delusion, and she clocks immediately that this could be a trap. Stilgar thinks it is a test from Shai Hulud. Lady Jessica, and this is the fascinating part, Lady Jessica is intrigued. Because the Bene Gesserit have had files on Feyd-Rautha for decades, they know his genetic profile, they know what he was bred to be. And Jessica, who has spent this entire story making morally catastrophic decisions in service of a plan she only half believes in, sees something in this offer that she cannot dismiss. Feyd-Rautha is Bene Gesserit stock. Not a Reverend Mother, not trained, but the bloodline program that produced Paul also ran a parallel track through the Harkonnen line. Feyd is, in the language of the Sisterhood, a cousin candidate, an asset they had written off. Jessica tells Paul, meet with him. The meeting happens in the deep desert. No armies, Paul, Chani, and 2 Fedaykin. Feyd arrives alone, which is either the bravest thing anyone has ever done or the most arrogant. And with Feyd, honestly, it is both simultaneously. And here is the scene that would have broken the internet. Paul and Feyd, face to face in the open desert, Arrakis's twin moons overhead, the sand cold and still. No blades drawn, not yet. Feyd speaks first, because of course he does. You're going to win, he says. Everyone knows it. The question no one is asking is, what does winning actually cost you? Paul says nothing. He is watching 1,000 futures rewrite themselves in real time. My uncle, Feyd continues, has made promises to the Emperor that the Baron cannot keep. The Sardaukar will be on the ground within a fortnight. The Emperor expects House Harkonnen to deliver your head. What the Baron has not told His Imperial Majesty is that House Harkonnen cannot find you, cannot hold the Sietches, and is hemorrhaging spice revenue at a rate that will make us insolvent within 2 years. He pauses. I am not offering you my loyalty. I am offering you a transaction. You get the Sardaukar deployment routes, the Baron's private communications with the Emperor, and a Harkonnen heir standing beside you when you walk into the Imperial throne room, which tells every great house that this is not a rebellion, it is a regime change. In exchange, I want the northern territories of Arrakis, formal recognition as head of a reformed House Harkonnen, and your word, your Atreides word, that I live. Chani draws her blade. Stilgar would be reaching for a crysknife, but Paul raises his hand. Because Paul has just seen something in the futures, not the jihad. For the first time in months, in the place where the jihad used to be, he sees something else. Here is where the MiniFlicks universe detonates. Paul agrees to the transaction, not because he trusts Feyd, he absolutely does not, but because the Bene Gesserit trained him to exploit every variable, and Feyd-Rautha is the most explosive variable in the known universe. What follows is a 3-week sequence that would have been the most insane second act in science fiction film history. Feyd delivers. Every piece of intelligence checks out. The Sardaukar deployment schedule, the Emperor's private doubts about the Baron, the fact that the Spacing Guild, who require spice above all else, has quietly sent observers to Arrakis with instructions to ensure neither side destroys the production infrastructure. Feyd, it turns out, has been doing his own political homework. The man is not just a killer. He is a strategist who was never given permission to strategize. Paul uses this intelligence to do something no desert guerrilla force has ever done before. He doesn't just raid, he redirects. Instead of a frontal assault on the Imperial forces, Paul engineers a political collapse. Feyd's testimony, delivered via Guild-authenticated recording, reaches the great houses of the Landsraad. A Harkonnen heir openly accusing the Emperor of sanctioning House Harkonnen's illegal deployment of Sardaukar? That is not a military crisis. That is a constitutional crisis. And the great houses, who have been terrified of both Atreides and Imperial overreach, suddenly have a third option: legitimacy. The Spacing Guild, protecting their spice supply, refuses to transport further Sardaukar reinforcements. The Emperor is stranded on Arrakis with the forces he has. And then Paul does the unthinkable. He rides into the Imperial camp not at the head of an army. He walks in alone. With Feyd-Rautha Harkonnen at his right hand. The visual of that scene, I need you to imagine this. Paul Atreides in Fremen's stillsuit, eyes full of spice blue, and beside him, Austin Butler in that black and red Harkonnen aesthetic, both of them walking through the parting ranks of Sardaukar, who genuinely do not know what to do because the entire command structure has been politically decapitated. That image would live in cinema history forever. The Emperor meets them in his command tent, surrounded by Bene Gesserit truthsayers, and this is where the scene reaches its thematic peak, because the Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam, the woman who set this entire catastrophe in motion, is sitting right there. And she looks at Paul, and she looks at Feyd. And for the first time in the entire saga, the most powerful Bene Gesserit alive does not have a prepared response. Because this outcome was not in any of the Sisterhood's models. They planned for the Kwisatz Haderach. They did not plan for the Kwisatz Haderach arriving hand in hand with the asset they abandoned. Paul addresses the Emperor in front of every truthsayer present, and every word he speaks is verified as true. He is not claiming divine right. He is not invoking prophecy. The prophecy the Bene Gesserit planted, the prophecy he has privately admitted is manipulation. He is making a legal, political, and economic case for regime change, so airtight that the Spacing Guild representative in the room begins nodding before Paul has finished speaking. The Baron, realizing the ground has completely vanished beneath him, makes one last desperate move. He orders the Sardaukar to attack. And this is the moment where Feyd earns everything. Because Feyd-Rautha has already spoken to the Sardaukar commanders, privately, over the past 3 weeks. And what he told them was simple. The Emperor used your honor to fight a private commercial war for House Harkonnen. Your dead are not martyrs. They are invoices. The Sardaukar stand down. The Baron is taken into custody, not by Fremen blades, but by his own nephew's instruction. And the look on the Baron's face, the realization that the weapon he spent a lifetime sharpening has finally, perfectly turned. That is a scene of pure Shakespearean devastation. The final confrontation is not Paul versus Feyd in the sand. It's Paul and Feyd together, standing before a reconvened Landsraad tribunal. Paul renouncing the false prophecy, publicly, on record, calling it what it was: Bene Gesserit manipulation of a colonized people's religious framework in service of a eugenics program. It is the most politically explosive speech in the history of the Imperium. And Chani, who has been the story's moral compass from the first frame, Chani is in the gallery, and she is watching. And for the first time, she sees Paul choosing truth over power. The alternate climax does not end with a jihad. It ends with the Fremen receiving formal sovereignty over Arrakis' spice production. It ends with a weakened emperor, a restructured Landsraad, and a new power. House Atreides and House Harkonnen, formally and uncomfortably allied, keeping each other honest through mutual distrust. It is not a happy ending. It is a real one. And in the final shot of this alternate universe, Feyd-Rautha stands at the edge of an open desert at dawn. The sand is moving. Somewhere deep below, a worm is turning. He looks at it for a long moment, and then he smiles. Not the arena smile, not the predator smile. Something new. Something that, in 45 years of Dune storytelling, Feyd-Rautha Harkonnen has never once been given permission to feel. The freedom of a man who chose his own fate. So what does all of this actually mean? Because here is the thing about a good alternate timeline. It's not just, wouldn't that have been cool? It's a lens. It shows you something about the real story that you might have missed. And what the Feyd defection timeline reveals is this. Dune, at its absolute core, is a story about the trap of inevitability. Paul wins in the original timeline. He rides the worm. He defeats the Emperor. He gets everything a hero is supposed to get. And Herbert, in the sequels, spends thousands of pages showing us that it was the worst thing that could have happened to humanity. Because a prophesied inevitable victory produces a jihad, produces a god emperor, produces a species so dependent on one man's vision that they lose the capacity to evolve. Our alternate timeline breaks the trap, not because Paul is smarter or more heroic, but because Feyd-Rautha, the villain, does the one thing the prophecy never accounted for. He refuses his role, and that refusal forces Paul to refuse his role too. The real lesson of Dune isn't beware false prophets. It's beware the stories so perfectly constructed that no one believes they can be rewritten. Feyd rewrote his story, and in doing so, he gave Paul the chance to rewrite the universes. So here is my question for you, and I want actual answers in the comments, not just fire emojis because I read these. If you were Feyd-Rautha in that moment after the arena, with everything you know about how the Baron operates, how the Emperor operates, and what Paul Atreides is building in the desert, do you stay loyal to a house that sees you as a weapon? Or do you make the call? And which version of Dune's ending do you think is more thematically honest? Denis Villeneuve's glorious, terrifying jihad? Or an alternate universe where the villain blinks first and the hero gets to choose something other than destiny? Drop it below. I'll be in the comments. And hey, that's just a theory. A MiniFlicks theory. Thanks for watching.